Fishing has always been my refuge. From the day my father first sat me down in his old wooden boat on the lake, it became more than just a hobby. It was a sanctuary. Fishing was my time for silence, a moment to be honest with myself, a chance for life to slow down, allowing me to see things more clearly. Today was no different. The lake swayed gently under the light of the setting sun, the only sound being the soft rustle of water. Before me lay a perfectly taut fishing line, while my thoughts swirled. Ahead of me was an entire weekend of quiet solitude. Usually, I would invite Mike, my best friend, but this time I wanted to be alone. After 3 months of grinding away at the office, I needed to reset. Before leaving, I lingered in the hallway. Monica stood by the mirror, adjusting her earrings. She always looked impeccable, even at home. Light makeup, neatly styled hair. She was the embodiment of elegance and grace. I couldn't help but smile as I watched her. "Are you sure you won't miss me while I'm gone?" I asked, teasing her a little. She turned to me, rolling her eyes with a playful smile. "Jack, let's be honest. You know I can't stand fishing. I'd rather stay home with a glass of wine than try to understand why you spend hours staring at water." I chuckled as I put on my jacket. "It's not staring, it's philosophy," I said, winking. "Besides, someone has to protect the house from, well, something. I checked the cameras just in case." She smirked, amused. "Oh, your cameras. Jack, you're such a paranoid. Who's going to rob us here? Bucks? Maybe he'll knock something over." "I just love technology," I shrugged, though a tiny doubt flickered inside me. "And besides, it's for your safety." Monica walked over, taking my hand. "You worry too much. Go relax, okay? I'll be fine without you. I'll probably just open a bottle of wine and watch a show." I laughed. "Don't relax too much, or Bucks will start thinking he owns the place." She laughed in return. Her laugh was always infectious. It was moments like this when I felt confident in our marriage. She was my anchor in this turbulent world, my stability. Before leaving, I paused at the door. "If you need anything, call me, all right?" "Of course, darling. And don't worry," she replied with a wink. "You've earned this break." With those words, I closed the door behind me and set off for my fishing trip. Now, sitting on the lakeshore, I replayed that conversation in my mind. How easily we laughed. How right everything seemed. Monica had never been into fishing, but she respected my love for it. We understood our differences and always found balance. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A notification. Motion detected in the living room. Automatically, I pulled it out and checked the screen. Bucks, our chubby ginger cat, had jumped onto the couch. Nothing unusual. I turned off the screen and put the phone away. Yet, something about the frequency of the living room camera activating lately stuck with me. It wasn't alarming, but a faint unease stirred somewhere deep inside. Was I overdoing it with all this monitoring? Or were the cameras just picking up every step Bucks took? I shook my head. Nonsense. Nothing could possibly disrupt our family's serenity. Later that evening, sitting by the fire, I thought about Monica again. I turned on my phone and decided to call her. "Hi," she said, her voice as soft as ever. "Caught anything yet?" "Not yet, but I'm just getting started. How are you?" "Everything's great," she replied. I made some pasta and opened a bottle of wine. Started watching a movie. "Which one?" "The Mystery of Silver Lake." "You'd definitely fall asleep watching it," she said, laughing. I smiled. Monica always knew how to keep a conversation light. We chatted for a few more minutes before I hung up, feeling warm from her words. Everything felt so right, so normal. But as soon as I ended the call, the phone vibrated again. Another notification from the camera. Motion detected in the living room. I opened the feed. Bucks wasn't jumping on the couch anymore. The room was empty. A faint noise came through the camera speakers, as if a distant conversation was happening somewhere. I turned off the phone, convincing myself it was just random sounds. The morning began with an odd sense of unease. I woke up in my tent earlier than planned, and instead of feeling refreshed, there was a heaviness in my chest. The soft rustling of the wind and the muted songs of birds, usually calming, now felt somehow wrong. Fishing wasn't going well. I tried to focus on the water, on the slow movements of the line, but my thoughts kept drifting back home. The cameras, those tiny electronic guardians, meant to bring me peace of mind, were now adding fuel to the fire. The notifications about movement in the living room from the night before lingered in my mind. Why had I even looked? I should have just turned off my phone and enjoyed the quiet. The phone vibrated again. Instinctively, I reached for it, expecting the usual message, motion detected in the living room, but there were no notifications. It was just a weak battery warning. These cameras were starting to ruin my mood. I sat by the water, trying to focus on fishing, but my mind kept circling back to the house. These cameras, installed for security, now felt like more than just gadgets. Why had I even put them up? To feel safer? Right now, they were doing the opposite. After a while, I pulled out my phone again. Maybe I'll check one more time, I thought. My fingers automatically opened the app. I switched to the camera in the living room. At first, nothing happened. Everything looked exactly as it always did. Buck stretched lazily and curled back up into a ball. I was about to close the stream when I saw Monica enter the frame. She walked across the room with a glass of wine in hand. She wore casual shorts and a t-shirt, her hair down. She looked relaxed. I smiled at the sight of her, but the next moment, something made me freeze. Someone else entered the room. My heart stopped when I recognized him. Mike, my best friend since childhood, the person I'd always thought of as a brother. We'd been inseparable since 5th grade. We'd been through schoolyard fights together, split our last dollars on pizza in college, and supported each other through everything. He was family. But what was he doing in my house? Mike walked confidently into the living room, shrugged off his jacket, and tossed it over the back of a chair. He looked completely at ease. Monica said something to him, and they both laughed. That laugh echoed in my head. It was too loud, too personal. I kept watching, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. Mike poured himself a glass of wine from the bottle on the table, sat on the couch, and leaned toward Monica. She sat down next to him, their knees almost touching. It's fine, I told myself. They're friends. Mike's always been close to both of us. But inside, unease began to simmer. Why was he there when I wasn't? Why hadn't Monica mentioned he'd be coming over? They were talking, their gestures relaxed but somehow too unguarded. Mike was animated, gesturing as he spoke, and Monica laughed, tilting her head toward him. She looked like she was genuinely enjoying his company. At one point, he reached for his glass, and his fingers briefly brushed hers. The gesture was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. She didn't pull her hand away. I turned off the stream. My heart was pounding. It doesn't mean anything, I repeated to myself. It's just gestures, nothing to take seriously. But something dark was already taking root inside me. I sat by the fire, staring at the flames, but instead of feeling calm, I was consumed by anger and confusion. Mike, why him? Why was he acting like this was his home? Why hadn't Monica mentioned his visit? I thought back to the past few months. Mike had been coming over more often than usual. Sometimes he'd bring coffee or beer, sit at the table, and chat about his life. I hadn't thought anything of it. We'd always been close, and he was part of our lives. But now, in hindsight, I began to notice things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way his gaze lingered on Monica longer than necessary. Her smiles when she saw him. I couldn't help myself. I opened the stream again. On the screen, nothing had changed. They were still sitting on the couch, their conversation quieter now, but they still looked completely at ease with each other. At one point, Monica leaned toward Mike, her hand almost touching his shoulder. Mike smiled. His smile was strange, almost smug. She stood up and headed toward the kitchen, leaving him alone in the room. He stretched, leaned back on the couch, and looked like he was waiting for her to return. What's going on in my house? I thought. I turned off my phone, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. My best friend, my wife. They were acting like I didn't exist. The night passed in restless thoughts. I replayed the camera footage in my mind, analyzing every detail. While I was here, fishing, they were there, in my home. And though I hadn't seen anything overt, something about their behavior felt off. Too many coincidences, too many small details that didn't add up. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was going home early. I needed to see everything with my own eyes. When I left the campsite early that morning, the sky was just beginning to lighten. The soft dawn illuminated the road, but darkness gripped my heart. I couldn't shake the images from the day before, Monica's and Mike's laughter, their gestures that seemed far too intimate. My thoughts churned, and all I wanted was to see it for myself. Maybe it really was a misunderstanding. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But with every mile I drove, my conviction grew stronger that I wasn't wrong. I parked my car around the corner to avoid drawing attention. At this hour, the street was silent, the only sound the faint crunch of tires on asphalt. I got out and stood in front of my house. The lights were off, and everything inside appeared still. The perfect moment, I thought. Quietly, I unlocked the door with my key. The house was silent, but it wasn't a comforting silence. It was heavy, oppressive. I shut the door behind me, careful not to make a sound, and paused in the entryway. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like it could be heard in the farthest corners of the house. Bucks, our cat, strolled past me lazily without even glancing in my direction. His calmness only made the contrast with my inner turmoil more striking. Slowly, I made my way up the stairs. Each step echoed dully in my ears, but I pressed on, step by step. Reaching the top, I stopped in front of the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, and I could hear muffled voices. Their voices. I froze. Fury began to boil inside me. My first instinct was to burst in, but I held back. Instead, I pushed the door open just enough to see what was happening. They were lying in my bed. Mike was half-dressed, his shirt hanging off the back of a chair by the window. Monica lay beside him, her hair disheveled, her face wearing a relaxed smile. They were still asleep, their legs intertwined under the blanket as though this wasn't my space but theirs. For a moment, I couldn't believe my eyes. This was the moment when every fear I had was confirmed, crashing down like a tidal wave. Anger mixed with pain as I realized everything I loved, everything I thought was mine, now belonged to someone else. And that someone was the person I trusted most. "Wake up," I said loudly, my voice reverberating off the walls. Monica screamed, her eyes snapping open in terror. Mike bolted upright, his face turning pale as a sheet. "Jack," Monica cried, "this isn't what you think." I stood in the doorway, fists clenched. "Oh, really? And what exactly am I supposed to think, Monica? That my best friend and my wife decided to use my bed for a morning nap?" Mike raised his hands as if trying to calm me. "Jack, wait. We can explain." "Explain?" My voice was cold, almost detached. "You want to explain why you're lying in MY bed with MY wife?" Monica began sobbing, pulling the blanket around her. "Jack, please, give us a chance." I cut her off, stepping into the room. "A chance?" I said, my voice brimming with anger. "You're asking for a chance after I walked in on this? After you let him into our home, into our life, and now into our bed?" Mike opened his mouth to say something, but I turned on him, fists still clenched. "You were like a brother to me, Mike. You were part of my family. How could you?" He looked away, his face a mixture of shame and fear. "Jack, I didn't mean to." I laughed bitterly. "You came into my house, crossed every boundary, and you're telling me you didn't mean to?" I walked to the closet and began throwing his clothes onto the floor. Mike took a hesitant step forward. "Jack, let's talk this out." "You've had plenty of time to talk, Mike," I said, tossing his shirt at him. "But now, you're going to leave. Immediately." He hesitated, unsure of what to do, but then gathered his things and headed for the door. "And one more thing," I said as he reached the doorway. "If I ever see you near my house, my wife, or anything that has to do with me, you won't have anywhere to run. Do you understand?" Mike nodded, eyes downcast, and left. When the door shut behind him, I turned to Monica. She was still sitting on the bed, her face streaked with tears. "Jack, please." "Don't," I said, my voice icy and calm. "You've destroyed everything. Everything we built together." Her tears didn't move me. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there in what now felt like a stranger's space. After the morning nightmare of catching them in my bed, the day stretched on in slow motion. Every moment was laced with pain, anger, and the overwhelming feeling that I'd lost control of my life. But instead of letting those emotions consume me, I made a decision. I would act. They had shattered my world, but I wasn't going to leave this fight defeated. I knew one thing. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't let them walk away from this unscathed. They had taken everything I valued, and now I was going to take back control. Revenge wasn't about rage or impulsive actions. It was about a cold, calculated plan that would leave them to face the consequences of their choices. I didn't need lies or dirty tactics. The truth was enough. All they had to do was feel the weight of what they'd done. Monica was sitting in the kitchen, her face still damp from tears. I walked in without looking at her and headed to the cabinet to grab a bottle of water. Her gaze felt like it was burning into my back. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling as she tried to sound steady. "Please, let's talk." I turned around, taking a slow sip of water, and looked at her. There was fear in her eyes. Just yesterday, I would have done anything to protect her, to erase that fear. Today, she deserved it. "About what?" I asked coldly. "About how you brought him into my bed, or about how you planned to keep it hidden." She winced as if my words physically struck her. "It was a mistake," she began. "A mistake?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The mistake was trusting you, building this home with you, believing that you valued our marriage." Her lips quivered, but I didn't give her a chance to speak. "Pack your things," I said, pointing toward the door. "You can stay here until evening. Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce." "Jack, wait," she sobbed, standing up from the chair. "We can fix this. I love you." "Don't you dare say that to me," I interrupted, stepping closer. "Love? If you loved me, Mike would never have stepped foot in this house." She sank back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. I turned and left the kitchen, unwilling to listen to her tears any longer. That was only the first step. By tomorrow, she would no longer be in this house. The next day, I met with Robert, my lawyer. He was tall, with perfectly styled hair and a cold, professional demeanor. I laid everything out for him. The affair, the camera footage, and how I caught them red-handed. "It's a clear case," he said, jotting notes in his notepad. "The house is entirely in your name, correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I want her to leave with nothing." "That's possible. The evidence of her infidelity strengthens your case. We can file for divorce citing her fault, which will bar her from claiming shared assets." I nodded, feeling a flicker of control return for the first time in days. "Get started." Robert smiled faintly. "This shouldn't be difficult." If Monica's betrayal had struck my heart, Mike's had hit my very core. He was the man I'd considered a brother. We'd been inseparable since 5th grade, and over the years, I trusted him more than anyone. Now that trust had turned to hatred. The first step was making sure Sarah, his wife, knew the truth. I found her number in my phone and called. She answered almost immediately, her voice calm as always. "Jack? Hi. How are you?" Her voice sounded genuine, and it reminded me how unfairly Mike had treated her. "Sarah, this is serious," I said. "We need to talk." "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone becoming cautious. "It's about Mike," I said. There was silence on the other end before she replied. "I'm listening." I told her everything. How I caught them together, the camera footage, the betrayal. I spoke calmly, but every word felt like a blade. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time. I don't know what to say," she finally whispered. Her voice trembled, though she tried to stay composed. "You deserve to know the truth," I said. "It wouldn't be right to keep this from you." She thanked me, and I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out. Now it was up to her to decide what to do. Mike owned a small marketing firm. His reputation as a reliable and honest professional was the foundation of his success. But I knew that reputation no longer aligned with reality. While I wasn't going to spread lies, I saw no reason to hide the truth. I reached out to a few of his clients I knew personally. In my messages, I simply laid out the facts. Mike had betrayed my trust, destroyed our friendship, and ruined my marriage. That was enough. Clients who valued integrity began to ask questions. A few contacted me directly to confirm the details. I was honest, providing the evidence I had. Within a week, I began to see the results of my actions. Monica had left the house. Her belongings were gone, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. She tried to contact me, but I ignored her calls and messages. From now on, all communication would go through our lawyers. Sarah sent me a short message. "Thank you for telling me. I'm staying with my mom." That was all I needed to know. She wasn't planning to forgive Mike, and neither was I. Mike lost 2 major clients. One of them wrote to me, saying they couldn't work with someone who betrayed trust even in their personal life. It was the beginning of the end for his business. The reputation he'd built over years began to crumble. I sat in my house, now truly my own, staring at the empty living room. Revenge hadn't brought me joy, but it had given me a sense of justice. They had destroyed my world, but I had rebuilt it. And while the scars would remain, I knew I had come out stronger. 3 months had passed since that morning when I caught them in my bed. 3 long months that tested my resilience. Each day felt like a battle, with anger, betrayal, and hatred. But by the time I stepped into the courtroom, those emotions had begun to give way to determination. I was ready to put an end to it all. Not for them, for me. The courtroom was where everything would finally be settled. It was where I would close the door on the past for good. The room was cool and sterile, with white walls, the heavy oak judge's bench, and the impassive faces of the attorneys. Monica sat across from me, beside her lawyer. She looked exhausted, as if these months had drained all her charm. Her face was pale, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once perfect hair was slightly disheveled. She avoided looking at me, hiding her gaze behind thin glasses I'd never seen her wear before. Robert, my lawyer, was the opposite. He sat upright, his suit perfectly pressed, his demeanor sharp and focused. "Your Honor," Robert began, standing confidently, "we present evidence confirming the respondent's infidelity. These materials include video recordings legally obtained from the plaintiff's home." He handed a flash drive to the judge, who inserted it into the computer and silently reviewed the footage. The judge's expression remained neutral, though I noticed a slight, deep breath before he stopped the playback. Monica lowered her head, as though even a glance in her direction could turn into an accusation. "Respondent," the judge addressed her, "do you admit to the infidelity?" Her voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." Those words sounded like a verdict. For her. For me. For what once connected us. Robert continued, "Given the evidence presented, we request that all property remain with the plaintiff and that the respondent be denied any financial compensation." Monica's lawyer argued against the motion, claiming that she had contributed to the home, had no stable income, and needed support. But Robert was unyielding. "Your Honor, the respondent's actions led to the dissolution of the marriage. The house is solely in the plaintiff's name, as are the accounts. Division of assets in this case would be unjust." After a brief recess, the judge delivered his decision. Based on the evidence presented, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff. The house, joint accounts, and property remain his. The respondent is denied financial compensation. I felt a strange sense of relief. Not joy, but closure. Monica didn't say a word. She just sat there, head bowed, as her lawyer gathered the papers. As we exited the courtroom, she approached me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Jack, she began, but I raised a hand to stop her. "It's too late, Monica. Take care of yourself." She nodded and walked away without looking back. That was the last time I saw her. Mike, by that point, had nearly destroyed his own life. His once thriving marketing firm had begun to unravel even before my court date. When a few clients learned the truth about what he'd done, they severed ties. At first, it was isolated cases, but the rumors spread, and his business began losing its reputation. A mutual acquaintance who worked with his company once told me, "Mike's not even in charge anymore. His clients left, and the ones who stayed are forcing him to cut his rates because no one else will work with him. He barely shows up at the office." Sarah, his wife, left almost immediately after I told her what happened. She took the kids and moved in with her parents. Mike was left alone in his large house, which now seemed like a prison. Rumor had it he'd started drinking heavily. One day, I ran into him by chance at a bar. He was sitting in a corner, disheveled, his face flushed, a glass of whiskey in his hand. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, as if trying to disappear. I felt something unexpected, a sense of pity, not for him, but for what he could have been if he hadn't destroyed everything. After the court case and Mike's downfall, I slowly began rebuilding my life. For a while, the house still felt haunted by memories of what had happened, but I decided it was time to move forward. I threw out old furniture, repainted the walls, and got rid of anything that reminded me of Monica. The house began to feel alive again, becoming my space rather than a place tainted by the past. Work became my refuge. I poured my time and energy into projects, immersing myself completely. My colleagues, aware of what I'd been through, supported me in quiet, unobtrusive ways. Their understanding helped me focus on the present. Eventually, I started fishing again. Those early mornings by the lake, sitting in silence with a rod in hand, became my therapy. In those moments, I felt life moving forward, despite everything that had happened. The most unexpected turn came when I met Maria. We crossed paths at a corporate event. She was an architect, and her confidence and kindness immediately caught my attention. At first, we only talked about work, but soon we started spending time together outside the office. One evening, she asked me, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" I smiled, looking at her. "Yes, but it made me stronger." Her gaze was soft, understanding. "You're incredibly resilient. I think that's your greatest strength." Her words struck a chord. For the first time, I realized that even after everything I'd endured, I could still build a new life. And maybe, just maybe, I could share it with someone who truly deserved it. The past hadn't disappeared completely. It left scars that reminded me of what I'd gone through. But I no longer saw those scars as weaknesses. They were proof that I'd endured. Monica and Mike were firmly in the past. Monica had moved to another city and was reportedly trying to start over. Mike? He was still wrestling with his demons, but that was his choice. I was looking forward. Life was moving on, and I knew better things lay ahead. Sitting by the lake with my fishing rod in hand, I felt peace within myself for the first time in a long while.